Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me here. Enjoyed it. There you go see what's doing on 20 meters or something, whatever. All right, let's see. I'm going to have to stand back here just so that I can hit the, what do we hit? Enter to change page on your PC?
Space bar or arrow key.
Oh, space bar? Okay, fine. All right. So, first of all, no, really, seriously, thank you very much for inviting me to the club to speak this evening. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm local. I live in University City, so it's really easy for me to get here. I was up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa 2 weeks ago, St. Charles, well, I guess St. Charles 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Cedar Rapids. So it's great to get out and hopefully put COVID behind us. I'm not so sure about that based on the news today. And some of you are familiar faces. I've met you before, and some of you I've worked with, like Harry at Boeing. So it's nice to see everybody here, and hopefully I'll catch up with you on 2 meters. I am a member of the club. I didn't vote because I really didn't have a chance to read the changes, so I didn't want to contaminate the vote. But I am a member. It's just unfortunate that my schedule keeps me so busy that I don't get a chance to come to many of the meetings. So I'm going to try to share a little bit with you about ARRL and about Dave Proper. You can get to understand a little bit more about me. As I say, I'm local. I'm right here in University City, so I am a resource to you, and I hope you will take advantage and call me or email me or text me if you have a question about either ARRL or amateur radio for that matter. And I've got some cards up here at the front desk that you can take at the end of the meeting, which has my phone number and my email address on it and everything, and it's easy to get a hold of me. So let's see what I've got here. Ham radio. Well, yeah, it's amateur radio. It's a 100-year-old hobby sanctioned by international treaty. Who knows the abbreviation for the international body that governs amateur radio? IARU? Well, the IARU, yes, the International Amateur Radio Union is the organization that links all of the individual country-based amateur radio organizations such as ARRL, Radio Society of Great Britain, Radio Amateurs of Canada, the German Amateur Radio Club, DARC, Deutsche Amateur Radio Club, etc. But the international body that governs amateur radio is the International Telecommunications Union, which is part of the United Nations. We have a seat at the table through our membership in IARU, and ARRL actually serves as the secretariat of the IARU. So very important. If you think back, oh my gosh, 15, 20 years ago at least, when the WARC bands became available. How did that happen? It happened because of the IARU, the Amateur Radio Union, lobbying the ITU to say, hey, give us some more spectrum in between the other bands so we can take better advantage of propagation. VHF, UHF, microwave allocations all fall into the same body. So every time we get a new band at 12 gigs or 6 gigs or 3 gigs, that's all because it's been sanctioned and approved through the United Nations, basically, the ITU, that manages spectrum allocation for the entire world. What did amateur radio give me? I started in the hobby when I was 8 years old. My dad stuck a soldering iron in my hand, and he helped me build a Heathkit AR3. His call was WA2GEX. This goes back into the late 50s. And he tutored me probably fairly well because I ended up spending my life in electronics. But it gave me technical skills, communication skills, the level of electronics. I spent my career at Boeing, most of it anyway, 35 years there. Before that, a couple of electronics companies outside of Missouri. Lots of fun, many, many friends. I spent 5 years traveling internationally for Boeing to Israel, Finland, Switzerland, Australia and New Zealand, and I know hams in every country, and I got on 2 meters in every country and got invited to more radio club meetings than you can shake a stick at. So I have not quite DXCC in radio club meetings, but got to go to a lot. And it led to my career in science and engineering. I worked for a British company for a while called Ray Cal Milgo. It's a datacom house down in Florida, ACR, and then McDonnell Douglas, which later became part of Boeing. And that's who brought me here to St. Louis after about 8.5 years. I started with Boeing McDonnell Douglas in Titusville, Florida on the Tomahawk cruise missile program. And after about 8.5 years there, they said, hey, we got a slot for you up here in St. Louis. If you want to stay with the company, get your butt up here. And with 2 kids in college, that was a pretty smart decision. You know, you don't think about it. So that's what my old QSL cards look like from Long Island, New York. And as I said, my dad was a ham, so at one time we had father and son type QSL cards. And then I had several of my own of different varieties. That goes all the way back to 1963 when I got my novice license, and then general, advanced, and extras, WB2PMP, and then K2DP. And I got that when I was living here in St. Louis back in 1996. They opened the vanity call sign window again, and I said, okay. And I was going to get W0DP or K0DP, but they were already taken. DP obviously is my initials, Dave Proper, so I said, oh, what the heck, I've been a 2 all my life, I'll stay a lowly 2, you know. And so that explains it. September, it'll be my 60th anniversary of being a licensed amateur radio operator. I can still remember to the day, this is before VE testing, before almost instantaneous getting your call sign, waiting weeks and weeks after taking my novice exam for that piece of paper to show up in the US snail mail with a 4-cent stamp on it, right? So fun times. So more fun. What did I do at work? I played with the avionics, mostly radar and electronic warfare development programs for the F-18, the Super Hornet, and the F-15 Eagle aircraft. This airplane, the E-18G Growler, that would be an airplane that I think every amateur would be very interested in. There are over 60 antennas on that airplane. It's basically a flying transmitter and receiver. And its purpose in life is to go jam enemy ground radars so that when they're going in with a squadron of regular F-18s, the bad guys can't see them coming in. We just jam the living daylights out of the ground radar, and they can't see us coming in. So an F-15EX, you know, Harry will tell you, this isn't your father's F-15 anymore. The F-15 came off the line first in 1972, right, Harry? First flight, 1972. And this is not your father's F-15. This is not even your son's F-15 at this point anymore. This is brand new. McDonnell Douglas Boeing is making 144 or 150 new F-15EXs for the US Air Force. And it's got all new avionics, new upgrade, new radar, new mission computers, new electronic warfare, new displays, got what we call large area displays, 19-inch panels in the front and back cockpits. It's just like sitting at your simulator at home with your joystick, except this one really flies. So I had lots of fun at work. I mean, honest to God, I worked until I was 69 and a half. And I only got out before I was 70 because somebody said, hey, we're going to make it look like you're 70, so if you want to go, you know, maybe we'll let you go. And then they realized, oh, no, wait a minute, we can't let him go. And I had to go fight my way out. But really, I had a great career, 35 years. It was really a lot of fun. I got to play with electronics, except for the 5 years on international programs where I had to forget everything and throw it in the garbage, you know, because I was traveling internationally, but had lots of fun. So what do I do at home? These are pictures of stations at home. In the upper left-hand corner, you see somewhat modern gear there with the TS-890 and an ACOM 1000. So I work lots of stuff from HF all the way up to 6 meters. I have 2-meter FM, 440 FM capability, but no sideband and CW. Although way back when, in 1965, I was on 6-meter and 2-meter sideband and CW with homebrew transmitting converters. If you guys remember what a 5894, or ladies, remember what a 5894 transmitting tube was? And New Vista converters for the receivers. You take the 10-meter signal, double it, 56 megahertz, then subtract 4 megs, and holy cow, you're on 6 meters. And there were a few stations on back then, but that was fun. The rest of the 6 meters was all AM. There was a lot of 6-meter AM activity here in St. Louis back then, by the way. I used to work guys up here all the time. It was an easy 1,000-mile hop from New York to St. Louis on 6 meters. So mostly a modern station on the left. You can see the computer and screen, and I do work FT8. So how many people work FT8 here? Who doesn't work FT8? Okay. FT8 has its place and purpose, and it's a great weak signal mode. It's also a great mode if you are constrained to living in a house or a condo and you can't put an outdoor antenna up because you've got deed restrictions or your physical property just doesn't adapt itself to it. You can stick a wire up in your attic, and with 100 watts, you can be working the world on FT8 because you're putting out a weak signal, but it can be decoded on the other end. So it's got its place, and it allows folks to operate where they might not be on the air at all. So every mode has its place in life and purpose, and even I've become an adopter of it, and I have a lot of fun with it on 6 meters, and I'm waiting anxiously to see what the fall's going to be like on 6 meters, how much F2 DX we really get. Upper right-hand corner is a tribute to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It's my Collins S-Line collection. It's all mid-1960s gear. I've restored all of it. It's fun to use. It doesn't have all the whiz bangs that the TS-890 has, but it really sounds nice. And then the bottom right-hand picture, that shows 2 stations. On the left of that picture, for those that might remember 1957, Johnson Ranger transmitter on the right does AM, amplitude modulation. And there is a group here in Missouri on 75 meters, Monday through Friday mornings on 3885 called the MOCAM net, Missouri Kansas AM net. And it covers from southern Illinois all the way across to Kansas City. And it's the nicest bunch of guys you'd ever want to meet. Bob Heil gets on that net frequently. Gary Wardock, if you guys know Gary Wardock, you know the name Mosley Antennas, right? Gary's the owner of Mosley. Gary shows up on that net all the time, and we have a lot of fun talking to each other. Collins receiver, I'm trying to get there we go. If you can see, the arrow show up there? Yes. Yeah, okay, that's a 51J4. That was a general coverage AM-CW receiver made by Collins in 1957. It's still fabulous today, but the interesting story is I carried that thing back from Israel with me on a business trip. And the story of how I managed to get it back is a whole other story. The other station is Collins sideband gear. That's the 75A4 receiver. Historically, that was the first dedicated single sideband receiver ever produced with a product detector and mechanical filters. And it's still great today. And then the transmitter is Eldeco. That's a single sideband exciter. There's a matching amp that goes with it. It's sitting on my workbench right now because I'm still restoring it. But lots of stories about that. This is what you do with vintage radio equipment. And I was talking to, where are you? There you are. I was talking to Michael earlier today. And the fun thing about this is, trust me, when you're pulling these parts out of old radios, you can say a lot of things you don't want anybody else to hear you saying. But there is amateur radio because of ARRL. And we talked a little bit about why we got the Walkmans, because ARRL has a seat at the table through the IARU, which then has a seat at the table with the ITU. It is the National Association for Amateur Radio. It was started in 1914 by the old man himself, Hiram Percy Maxim. If you go up to headquarters, and I'll show you a picture of headquarters a little bit later. Has anybody ever been up to Newington and seen ARRL headquarters? Okay, I know it's a fur piece from here in Missouri. You know, it's 1,300 miles to get out there. But you can see Hiram Percy Maxim's key, his original CW spark gap key. You can see his original spark gap transmitter. And HPM, as we call him, or the old man, he is the one that founded ARRL. It was founded to advance the science and art and enjoyment of amateur radio. And then we have our mission. And the mission of ARRL today is based around these 5 pillars. So this is a great thing because amateur radio, you know, I've been involved with it for over 60 years. You know, I started as an SWL like most of us did. And as an SWL, you know, that's one thing. I used to listen to Radio Moscow. Boy, Radio Moscow coming into New York City, Long Island area, I mean, they'd be pegging the S meter on 40 meters back in the 60s. You know, it sounded like KMOX. You never know the difference. But there are all these different facets of amateur radio. You could be interested in VHF communications, weak signal work on VHF communications. You could be interested in contesting. You could be interested in DXing. You could be interested in public service. You could be interested in emergency communications, MCOMs. And all of these are individual niches within amateur radio. But together, it pulls us together as a community. And it's just a hobby that I've never lost interest in, you know. And when I started dating my soon-to-be wife, my ex-fiancée, as I like to call her, you know, one of the first trips over to my parents' house, down to the radio room, I kind of wonder, I said, this kind of comes with me. it's part of me. And we were both in college at the time, you know. But she knew she was dealing with an engineering student, so she kind of figured as much. But anyway, as I said, public service, many facets to public service, right? I mean, just think of what you got here in St. Louis. You've got ARRL, you've got all the walkathons that different clubs support, provide communications for different public service events. You've got the Hospital Amateur Radio Network here in St. Louis, right? So it's just lots of different opportunities to do things. We advocate for the amateur radio community. Who do we advocate to? Well, you know, back down 3 or 4 levels from the ITU and the IARU, you have here in the United States, the Federal Communications Commission, where you get your license from. But who allows the FCC to run? It's those guys that you elect every 2 years in Congress and every 6 years in the Senate, right? Guys and gals that get elected to Congress that fund the FCC and approve the regulations that the FCC enforces and makes them law. So we have and we maintain a law firm in Washington, D.C. that represents the ARRL to the Federal Communications Commission. So for example, one of the things that we're working on right now, you know, we are like one of the only Western countries that has a data rate limit of 56K on data transmission on VHF and UHF. This is like, you gotta be kidding me. Why? Canada, it's unlimited. Somebody wants to run gigabit data on 2 meters, they can do it, you know, as long as they're in the right segment of the band. So we advocate for the amateur community, and we represent the amateur community to the US government. How many of you have read parts of FCC, the law, Part 97? Okay, what's one of the first things it says about it? Amateur radio. It's there to provide a cadre of trained communicators, trained radio communicators, because when all else fails, it's amateur radio that's going to come up first before anything else. Point-to-point communications, whether it's HT to HT or 50-watt 2-meter radio with your GP3 vertical up on a 20-foot mast stuck on the back end of your car to somebody else, you know. We are still the original providers of emergency communications. Education. Has anybody had a chance to look at the Learning Channel on the ARRL website? Great. Well, you were talking about looking for a program. Okay, there are videos that are professionally recorded programs on a variety of subjects. Everything from how to use electronic logging and which programs are better for which purposes, to how to do the new calculation for RF safety, for RF exposure. There's an instructional video on that. You can find training on almost everything, with the exception of license classes. I mean, there are not full-blown licensing classes up on these are short, half-hour, 45-minute type videos. But there are hundreds of topics out there for you to take advantage of, and with an internet connection here, you've got an instant program right there on the ARRL Learning Channel. But obviously, we're doing lots of other things in the area of education. We're working with STEM activities. Are you familiar with the ARRL Teachers Institute that's run several times a year? Okay, I saw one hand go up in the back. So ARRL brings teachers up to Newington for a 1-week training class. And these are usually, you know, science, math teachers for the most part, but you get them from all the different subject areas. And they teach them about amateur radio. They get them through a basic licensing course. And then they take them out into the parking lot. And this happened to me last July. I walked out of a meeting at headquarters during the board meeting. And I walked out of a meeting at headquarters, was walking across the parking lot to the W1AW building, which is a separate old building that houses the station. And I see a half a dozen teachers out there with antennas pointed up at the sky and HTs in their hand. And they were all sitting there making contacts through one of the satellites. I mean, this was unbelievable. It was great. It was absolutely great. And these folks were so excited about what they were doing. I mean, it was just wonderful. Then, of course, technology. I mean, one of the things we do, does anybody read the equipment reviews that show up in QST? Okay. I mean, ARRL's got a lab that looks like one of my labs back at Boeing, honest to God. It's got a screen room. For those of you not familiar with that terminology, that's an RF shielded room. In other words, if we took copper screening, put it around the four walls of this room and the ceiling and the floor, we could basically not hear a single signal. Your cell phones wouldn't work. You know, everything would be blocked out. And that's what you want to do when you're testing a piece of equipment, because when you're evaluating it, you only want to see the signal that you're putting into that piece of equipment. You don't want to have any other signals creeping in there that might change the results of your testing. But we do all of the testing and equipment evaluations, and I hope that some of you are at least taking advantage of the digital version of QST that you can read on your tablet or on your computer, because for these equipment reviews, you'll notice that in the online version, there's a little triangle button that you can hit for video, and you can watch the testing as it was being done and get much more out of the equipment review. You know, seeing is believing, they used to say. So I would take a look at that if you're not taking advantage of that. And then, of course, membership. You know, being a member of ARRL, aside from giving you all the benefits of the areas that I was mentioning here, it puts you in a community. It gives you somebody to call and pick up the phone if you have a question. There are, well, Dave just happens to be here in St. Louis, so you're lucky that I'm here in St. Louis. I'm a local guy. You can get me easily, you know. You can drive by my house if you want and come on in. But you have a Missouri section manager. You have the Missouri section emergency coordinator. That's Jeff Young over in St. Charles. But you have other technical specialists and appointed positions here in Missouri that are available to help you as part of ARRL. So hope that helps. How many members do we have? It's a little less than 160,000 right now. We're organized into 15 divisions. The Midwest division is one of them. Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas make up the Midwest division. There are 71 sections. Each of those states happens to be its own division, its own section. But if you were to look at New York, for example, the state of New York has about 7 different sections because it's so populous. Okay, so California has 7 or 10 sections within that state alone. There are 2,500 affiliated clubs, and I made a note for myself. I noticed that the club was incorporated in 1947. I can go back and look to see when you became affiliated with ARRL. Well, we may be way overdue for a 50-year award plaque. I don't think anybody's come to the club that I'm aware of and awarded you a plaque for X number of years affiliation. So I gotta check that when I get home and see what we need to do to get caught up here. But we are very grateful for those clubs that affiliate with ARRL, because it supports the ARRL by having 51% of your full members as ARRL members, which I'm sure you have. As we said, ARRL was founded in 1914. QST has been published since December of 1915. Headquarters and the W1AW station, 2 separate buildings located in Newington, Connecticut, which is right outside of Hartford. And we have less than 100 employees right now. We're down to about 90. And so when you think about how ARRL is operating and serving 155,000, 157,000 members on any given day, 90 people, that's a lot. And then you've got, you know, basically 30 directors, vice directors, 15 and 15, 1 from each division, and then 5 officers. So a lot of people, and the section managers, of course, but trying to handle questions and answers from 160,000 or 155,000 folks. This is about the lowest employee total that ARRL has experienced in many, many years, and part of that is intentional because we are so strapped for cash right now. And I'm sure you've seen the survey that went out back in May, and you've read what's going on, and I'll be glad to talk to anybody about that. If you have any questions, by the way, if you have questions while we're going through this, please feel free to ask. We don't have to wait until the end of the meeting. Okay, so that's a map of the geographic divisions. Those are the divisions of ARRL, and then there are multiple sections within some of the more populous divisions. Okay, so what's a division director and vice director? What do we do? I have no freaking idea. I've been trying to figure it out for 2.5 years. No, that's not true at all. Uh, First of all, we're a nonprofit corporation under the Connecticut state law. So we operate just like any other corporation, except we're not for profit. And we have to file annual reports. We have to adhere to all the rules and regulations of the state of Connecticut. And we have fiduciary responsibility as a director and vice director to manage and oversee the operations of the company. The CEO of the company reports to the board of directors. Directors do not direct employees of ARRL to do anything. That is the CEO's job, to manage the company. We are there to manage strategy and policy. And that's the role of the director. It's very different from what a lot of folks think of, but there it is, policy and strategy. And we are all volunteers, of course. We do this out of our own free will. And as I said, I've been trying to figure out what I've been doing for 2.5 years now. 20 hours a week minimum, 20 hours a week. My wife says I'm working harder now than I worked at Boeing. I said, no, that's impossible. But because we're involved with other volunteer organizations as well, and I'm on several other boards, it's pretty busy in retirement. It's unbelievable. Section managers, field organization, ARRL's field organization, do not report to the directors or vice directors. The field organization is an entirely separate organization. It's managed by an ARRL manager. He's an employee, Mike Walters, W8XY. I hope I'm giving this call sign correct. And Mike's a super guy. He's a semi-retired from Microsoft and got bored doing nothing, so he came to work for ARRL, and he's really a super guy. But that is the field organization. And so section managers and all the appointed positions that come under a section manager, technical coordinator, public information officer, public information coordinator, all these different appointed positions that are available in ARRL. And I encourage you to look at the ARRL website. Just go up, look at appointed positions and see what's out there, because none of them are all full. I don't know any section that's completely full with all their appointed positions. And if you'd like to help volunteer with ARRL and just help within the St. Louis metro area, we'd be very grateful for your help. So think about that, take a look at that. But section managers and directors, we do work together. And this is something that I want to tell you that Art Zeigelbaum, K0AIZ, our director, Art virtually pioneered this single-handedly, because when he became a director at the same time that I became vice director, except he had served as vice director under Rod Bloxham, K0DAS. And when Rod said, okay, I'm really retiring for good this time, he had retired 10 years ago from Collins, and then he takes the director's job, and that becomes a full-time job almost in itself. Art had heard things like from other directors or other section managers who said, my director never talks to me. I don't even know who the guy is or gal. There was that type of separation, and that's not good, because even though the section manager is a part of the field organization, our section manager is Cecil, AC0CA, and he's down at the other end of the state, Cecil Higgins, and he's down in, he's outside of Springfield, south of Springfield. And if I'm not talking to Cecil and Cecil's not talking to Art and I, how do we know what's going on? I know what's going on in St. Louis, kind of, but you get outside of the local area and you can't cover it all. So Art implemented a series of what we call the cabinet meetings. And every 4 to 6 weeks, the 4 section managers and Dave and Art get on a Zoom call and chew the fat for an hour and a half. So we find out what's going on. So we talk to them a lot. And then we've also done that with one of the appointed positions that's under Art, multiple positions, are assistant directors for the division. And these are usually chosen from active amateurs in the given areas, and we try to spread them out around the entire division. And we have a Zoom meeting with the 20 of those folks. And then, of course, I don't know, but I hope you got a chance to participate in the recent town hall meeting last month in early July. ARRL hosted a town hall meeting on Zoom. We had over 230 people check in, and it was question and answer. And in fact, David Minster, CEO of ARRL, was the guest speaker. And David Minster was on with us for almost 2 hours. And then we posted it, it's posted up, the whole thing's posted up on YouTube. You can go back and watch it at your leisure. And we've had over 400 hits there. So, you know, you got 6,000 members in the Midwest Division. We can't see all 6,000 all the time, but we certainly can hope to expose ourselves and get feedback from those that can participate in things like Zoom meetings, which makes it very effective to get together with everybody.
Dave,
Yes, sir.
about 10 or 12 years ago, Cliff Ahrens,
Yes, sure, I knew Cliff, yeah.
I think did he have your position or was it?
Cliff was actually, he might have at one time, but when I knew Cliff, he was the division director, and Rod was his vice director.
And he visited here quite, he did
Mm-hmm.
almost every year he did a ARRL meeting.
Uh-huh.
Program. And I don't, Max and Bill and Rebecca, I don't remember what it was, but we had everybody from ARRL. Kay, I forget her last name, she was.
Oh, she was president, yes, yes, sure.
It was about 10 years ago.
Yeah, they had a
Midwest meeting, was
here
it?
in St.
In
Louis.
St. Louis.
Uh-huh. Oh, well, that was a board meeting.
Right.
That was a board, I heard about that. I did hear about that recently.
They did the program, and there's an auditorium there, and all 3 rooms.
Yes.
We had 150.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. They have not moved board meetings out of Hartford, to the best of my knowledge, in recent years, because the setup that we need for a board meeting, aside from a big conference room where you got 35, 40 people seated in there, you know, around the table, so it's a big set of tables, audio setup, breakout rooms, etc. It became too difficult, I guess, for them, and too expensive to find out-of-state locations, because sure, I mean, we got the guys on the West Coast and they're saying, why the heck do I have to travel all the way to Hartford, you know? And the guys that live in New England, yeah, you get in your car and you drive there, you're there in 2 hours, you know? And in fact, I tried to pull a stunt like that, not a stunt, but I suggested shortly during my first year that when we were coming up to the 2022 Orlando Hamcation, which was the week right before the board meeting, or right within 2 weeks or 3 weeks of the board meeting. I said, well, why don't we just do it down there? You know, everybody's going to be there. All the directors will be there. Vice directors will be there. So why don't you just do it there? Oh, no, we can't do that. You know, I had a lot of head knocking on the wall. You know, there was a lot of it.
Got
But
one other thing too.
yeah, sure.
Our Back to Basics that starts in October. This was, I think, 2 years ago. Dave Minster has a brother who lives here in St. Louis.
Yes, he does.
And he dropped in and gave us a,
Well, Dave was your guest speaker at Winterfest last year.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Now I came back from the board meeting with COVID. I did. That was honest to God truth. I came back from the meeting with COVID, and I was very fortunate that Carl Lutzelschwab, K9LA, who's the division director of the Central Division, which is our next door neighbor over there in Illinois, Carl staffed the ARRL table, and Carl held the ARRL forum on Saturday. Dave was your guest speaker for the Friday night dinner. So we were very fortunate to be able to bring Dave in for that. Yeah, that was great. So, committees. How does ARRL function? Well, you know, Brendan read off a list of committees that I'm tied to. Let me tell you, when I started as vice director, it's really like Congress. You go up to these meetings and you see on TV all these congressional hearings, right? It's just like that. It's just like that. Everybody uses formal titles. Everybody speaks only when spoken to, so to speak. You know, you push the button on your microphone, you get recognized by the chair. In this case, it's the president of ARRL, Rick Roderick. But honest to God, I felt like, you know, and as a vice director, I sit there's 2 rows of tables that go around the room. So you got 30 people around the room in the front row, those are the directors, and you got 15, and you got 15 people sitting around in the back row, those are the vice directors. So you're like the junior congressman from Missouri. I'm serious, that's really what it's like. It was hilarious. And so as a junior congressman, you get assigned to a committee. So they assigned me to a committee. They assigned me to the historical committee, which I call the hysterical committee. But it's the historical committee is charged with maintaining the ARRL historical collection and the history of ARRL, but also the history of amateur radio and amateur radio equipment. And there is a collection of equipment. For example, Collins receiver 75A4, serial number 1, hand-delivered to Newington by Art Collins back in 1957 or whatever it was, you know, is an artifact that we have. I mean, there's some really neat stuff up there. One of the things we're doing in the historical committee, coming soon at a theater near you, so to speak, we are putting up a virtual museum, and it'll be tied to the ARRL website. We have all the Heathkit gear loaded right now. We have a lot of Hallicrafters and Collins gear, pictures, and data, including schematics, loaded on that. It's going to become a research compository for anybody that's interested in antique radios or vintage radios in amateur radio. But we also have, you know, all these different artifacts related to, you know, the 1921 ARRL convention in Chicago, you know, pins and proclamations, the 1912 Naval Bureau of Ships listing of radio stations, which was ham radio stations, but it wasn't called that at that time, you know. The top hat that was awarded, it's a gray top hat that was awarded for the first transatlantic signal to be heard from the United States in Europe, which was awarded to some W1 back in 1921. All sorts of interesting artifacts like that, but we are getting ready to put this museum up, and we'll be probably going live with it, I hope, shortly after the first of the year, and it will be a project always in progress as we add different collections to it. For example, another interesting thing today, anybody remember the company called Harvey Wells? Okay, generation gap here. Okay. And I'm not that old, guys and ladies, but the Harvey Wells Company was in Sturbridge, Massachusetts, not too far north of Hartford, about 60 miles north of Hartford. And they made, during World War II, military radios, and then they made avionics radios for aircraft, and then they started making amateur radio equipment because it was started by Mr. Harvey and Mr. Wells, both of who were amateur radio operators. We have recently been given a collection of that equipment, and yesterday, a descendant of that family, who happens to be a ham, brought the families together at Newington to see a display of the equipment, and he gave a presentation on the history of the company, which has been recorded, and that will be up on the website as well, so that you can find out all you'd ever want to know about the Harvey Wells Corporation, which was very interesting. Factory was flooded in the late 1950s or early 1960s, and that became the end of the company, unfortunately. Anyway, what do we have for committees? So there's a couple of committees that are called standing committees. Standing committees are those committees that really run the business of ARRL in terms of policy and strategy. Remember, we don't direct anybody, even though we're called directors. We set policy and we set strategy. The first is the executive committee. The executive committee is exactly what it sounds like. It's made up of the presidents and the vice presidents, has 5 members that are elected by the board in addition to that, and it acts for the board as a go-between between meetings and other duties. Our Midwest Division Director, Art K0AIZ, was elected to the executive committee in 2023. That's pretty significant recognition when the board members elect Art. You know, you're getting up there. Standing committees, as I said, what runs the business? Administration and finance, okay? So the committee that studied why ARRL is in an adverse financial condition today. If you haven't heard, we're losing $1 million to $1.5 million a year, and it's been that way for about the last 4 or 5 years. The good news is ARRL had an endowment of almost $40 million, and it was wisely invested. We had our treasurer, who was a ham, who was a full professor of finance at University of North Carolina, managing ARRL's investments for free, okay? You don't get that type of help off the street. We were very fortunate, but Rick Nieswinder said, look, I'm retiring in a year from my position at the University of North Carolina, and I must retire from this because my wife would like to see me sometime, you know. And so we now have engaged a professional management company, financial management company, to manage the ARRL portfolio. So the good news is we've been able to draw down and meet our operating expenses by drawing on our endowment, but we can't do that forever. And at $1.5 million a year, that, you know, it doesn't take too long before you figure out you're in real deep trouble. So that is one of the reasons why we had to make adjustments to the due structure. And as I say, if you have any questions about that, I've got some charts and we can talk about it after the rest of this presentation. But administration and finance handles lots of the activity. Then there is a new focus that came on board a year ago relative to emergency communications. Remember I said, Part 97, the reason we exist in the eyes of the government is not to go contests on 20 meters, although that does provide good training for MCOMs. If you can dig a signal out of a contest on 20 meters CW or sideband, you know, when the pileup is 10 deep, you can extract the intelligence from an emergency message that somebody's trying to give you when the signal is barely readable. So it's perfectly good training, but we're there to provide a cadre of emergency communicators that know how to set up radios and operate radios in times of national emergency. So we now have a standing committee called Emergency Communications and Field Services. And we also, if you were aware, that about 2.5, 3 years ago, ARRL put in a salaried position at a high level called the Director of Emergency Communications. And we had a gentleman in there who was well qualified, but unfortunately took ill about 6 months after he started the job. So he really never got traction, and he had to retire due to medical issues. But Josh Johnston was recruited, and Josh has been up at headquarters now for at least 1.5 years, maybe it's 2 years. He came out of Arkansas. He had been at the state level in emergency management operations, and he's a licensed ham, and he's doing a fabulous job up there. So if you have questions about MCOMs, ARRL, and how things should be working, you know, Josh is your guy to go to up at headquarters. So field services, the field services part of that addresses the issue at a higher level of what I was telling you about before, where there were some comments coming from section managers that said, my division director never talks to me, doesn't even want to talk to me, you know, which is not perhaps the best way to have a good relationship with another amateur radio operator that lives in your territory, so to speak. So field services portion of that committee is working to formalize the relationship between directors and section managers. That doesn't mean they report to them. It just says, hey guys, you got to be talking to each other. You know, you should be talking to each other. And then programs and services. And I sit on that programs and services committee along with Art. Every service, every program that ARRL embarks upon kind of comes through that committee. So if you want to talk about changes to field day rules, it goes through that committee. You want to talk about changes to DXCC, it goes through that committee. You want to talk about changes to the VHF or microwave contest, it goes through that committee. So there are all the programs and all the services that ARRL provides, training, et cetera, all is handled through programs and services. There are other committees. One of the committees that has lots of sway up in headquarters is the Ethics and Elections Committee. You typically have 3 or 4 directors sitting on that committee. They must be directors that are not up for re-election in the coming year because they have to be absolutely neutral. But this is the committee that, number one, certifies the election results, certifies the nomination petitions. When you run for office, you have to have a nomination petition filed. It has to be signed by no less than 10 current ARRL members from your area, from your division or your section, if you're running as a section manager. And they have to certify, the elections committee has to certify, number one, that you're qualified to run. Qualified meaning that you've been an ARRL member for X number of years. If you're a director or vice director, you have to have had at least 4 years of current membership, you know, uninterrupted membership. And Historical Committee just happens to be one of the others. We talk about the RF Safety Committee that I'm on. I'm not really chair of that, but thank you very much. The fellow that's chair and the guys that, and people that sit on the RF Safety Committee, which deals with RF exposure, are some of the most brilliant and educated people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Most of these folks, they're all registered professional engineers or they're medical doctors. And they're all hams. And these guys already sit on the IEEE committees. Everybody familiar with IEEE? Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. They all sit on the IEEE committees and the FCC committees. They already work directly with the FCC because they're recognized experts in the field, and we've been able to recruit just a fabulous team, absolutely fabulous team. And I can't overemphasize the work that they did during the past 2 years on the change to the FCC. I hate to use the word requirements. It's the methodology for measuring RF exposure. If you look at what they've done, what the FCC did, they didn't change the spec limit. What they did is they changed the methodology to measure the RF signal at a given point. So I can't say enough about these guys. They did a fabulous job. They are so well respected that RSGB called them up and said, can you come over here and work with our committee because they need help? And then the RSGB gave them an award at Dayton 2 years ago in recognition of what they had done for the RSGB. So we're very, very fortunate. Anyway, here are the mugshots that I gleaned off the internet of your officers. Rick Roderick, K5UR is president. Rick's down in Arkansas. Mike Raisbeck, K1TWF is your first vice president. He's up in Massachusetts. Bob Valio, W6RGG, is out in California. Rod Stafford, that's Judge Stafford to those of us. Rod is a retired federal judge, like Cliff Ahrens was also. He is VP of International Affairs. He is the guy that sits on the IARU committee. He serves as secretary of the IARU and attends the meetings for IARU. John Sager is our new treasurer. John comes out of a long career in not-for-profit financial management, so he's really well suited to serve as our treasurer. He's in, I think, Wyoming. And then here's Art and Dave. That's another picture of the shack with an older amplifier. And then your local section managers, so to speak. Missouri, Cecil Higgins, as I mentioned before. Iowa, Lee Garner. Kansas, Ron Cohen. And Nebraska, Matt Anderson. So that's kind of how we're organized. But as I say, it's a friendly organization between the section managers and the directors, not a reporting line, no chain of command. I apologize, this is the best org chart I could find of ARRL, short of redoing it, and I realize it's very hard to read, but just to give you a quick overview, David Minster is up here, your CEO of ARRL, NA2AA, the Chief Financial Officer, Diane Middleton, and then a couple of key folks. Director of Operations is Bob Nauman, W5OV. Oh, I didn't mean to go back that way. Okay, how do I go back a slide? There we go, okay. Director of IT, by the way, for those of you that have had any problems over the years with your history with ARRL, your membership records, not getting QST, or it's going to the wrong address, or your email, if you're using an ARRL.net forwarding email address and it's not working, we had an open vacancy for the director of IT at headquarters for over a year, well over a year. We're very fortunate to recruit Steve Berry, N1EZ, out of the kind of local New England area. He came out of commercial electronics house, but he's fabulous, and he's been doing all he can, and he's been on board for about a year now, and he is doing all he can to straighten out all the funnies that were going on up there. Part of the problem was they went to a new HR, I'll call it, or membership record system called Personify, and the transition was painful. Reminds me of my days at Boeing. Every time they changed a big system, oh my God. You think, didn't you guys run this before on a trial basis? Oh no, we just throw the switch. But a lot of it's straightened out now. But if you have trouble with your membership records, a young lady by the name of Yvette Vinci is a great person to call and ask for help. And of course, I can give you phone numbers for all these folks later. QST, your publisher, Becky Schoenfeld. Josh Johnston here in emergency management. And then the other new position, relatively new position at ARRL over the last couple of years, is education and learning manager, Steve Goodgame. And you ought to see Steve at either Dayton or the Orlando Hamcation when the kids come in. All of a sudden, he's got a dozen kids around him in the ARRL booth, and he's got them captivated with some type of experiment. So he is really good. Lots of fun. Okay, and then Bob Inderbenson is Director of Marketing and Information, and like Bob is my go-to guy when I need help. Anyway, David Minster, if you haven't met David, if you didn't get to meet him last year when he was here, Dave's a super guy, and he's really trying hard to, you know, part of the problem at ARRL for a number of years was people looked at it like it was a radio club. But it's not a radio club, it's a membership organization. And it's got to be run like a membership organization where they're there to serve the 160,000 members. And David's been instrumental in changing the attitude there quite a bit. For example, you know, they're on East Coast time. You know, end of the day is 4:30 or 5 o'clock, whatever it is. But if I'm out on the West Coast in California, I pick up the phone at 2 o'clock. Ring, ring. Please, thank you for calling the ARRL. Our offices are closed now. Please call back tomorrow during regular business hours. Well, regular business hours, shoot, I got to get up at 4 a.m. in the morning for regular business hours if I'm out on the West Coast. So David said, hey guys, you know, we're here to serve the folks on the West Coast. So I want somebody, you know, somebody's going to be sticking around here till 7 o'clock at night. You know, so that we at least give those folks a chance to call at the end of their business day when they might have a chance. That's just one of the, I'll say, member-facing, membership-focused changes that Dave has implemented up there. All good. So I was telling you about Field Services Organization. This is Mike Walters, W-A-Z-Y, the furry beast. And Mike's absolutely a great guy. He's on more Zoom meetings with Art and I than I can shake a stick at. I don't know where he finds the time. But he tries to be on division level Zoom calls, and his sidekick, Steve Ewald, WV1X, is on almost all of our meetings with Art, with our section managers every month. Now, if you know, multiply that times 15 divisions, that's a lot of meetings that this guy is doing after work hours. And on top of that, he holds his own meetings with the section managers every month. There's a Zoom meeting with 71 section managers. So these are hardworking folks. What does Emergency Services Group look like? Well, there's 9,000 plus people as volunteer leaders. Those are your section managers, section emergency coordinator, district emergency coordinators, and emergency coordinators. So they do support, training, and organization. You know, there's the ARRL newsletter. Are you folks subscribing to the different email newsletters that ARRL puts out? Okay. The way you have to do that now is you need to go to your member profile. So you got to log into your ARRL page. And I know a lot of us, if you're like me, I got like 500 freaking passwords. They're all on spreadsheets. I mean, it just drives me nuts. But you got to have a password. You got to get your account set up. If you haven't done it yet, you know, go out there and say, register for the first time. As long as you're an ARRL member, you know, you'll be able to set up a new password and your ID. It's also part of how you set up your ARRL email. You know, if you want K2DP at ARRL.net, you know, you have to set that up and you have to tell them what your real email is, you know, what's hiding behind that, which is K2DP at charter.net, because it's a forwarding system, you know. But there are all sorts of newsletters, if you're a DX chaser, there's a DX newsletter. If you want to see what propagation is, the forecasts are, K7RA, I believe, writes the ARRL propagation forecast every week. ARES, MCOMS, Hints and Kinks. There's a dozen different newsletters that come out either on a weekly basis or monthly basis, and there's lots of information out there. So I urge you to take advantage of it. This is Josh. We were talking about Josh Johnston. As I said, he came out of the Arkansas Emergency Management Organization at the state level. He's FEMA certified, Auxcom certified. He's a registered instructor, and he's just doing a super duper job. Really very, very lucky to get him on board. So, what are you paying for? Well, I've showed you some of the many things that you're paying for, but it's not just the subscription to QST. It's learning, the opportunity to take advantage of educational training that ARRL offers, its services. For example, your kilowatt transmitter is getting into your phone line. Your wife says, "Get off the freaking radio. I can't hear Jane on the phone," right? How many times does that happen? Has it happened? Oh, come on, guys. Unless you're only working 2 meters, it's got to have happened to everybody. Happened to me. I'll be the first one to tell you about it. But if you call up the tech services department, you call up the lab at ARRL, they can help you understand how to cure that problem by putting ferrites on the phone cords. You know, I mean, there's a solution for almost every problem. There really is. It gives you a community, as I said. You know, there's lots of people, 155,000, 158,000 members of ARRL at any given day, and they will be able to. You will be able to reach out to them through ARRL, you know, if you're looking for help in a given area. And of course, there's leadership, the leadership in terms of representing the amateur community, the federal government, and the international organizations, et cetera. Another page on the ARRL website, the ARRL Current, that automatically brings you the digital format of all 4 magazines, all 4 current magazines on any given day. And of course, all 4 magazines, does everybody know all 4 magazines are available to you free in the digital format? Okay? I mean, that's tremendous. You know, I mean, I still had subscriptions to QEX and NCJ, National Contest Journal, because I paid for them, you know, years ago. And I was still getting them hard copy. Learning. ARRL Learning Network, we talked about that a little bit before, but if you go to this page on the website and you punch that learning, I mean, there's a list of upcoming webinars, and then you can search for any given type of information that you're looking for. There's several hundred out there which can really help you enhance your station performance, increase your knowledge in amateur radio, increase and improve your ability to operate and be successful in communicating. There's also podcasts. ARRL has podcasts. ARRL has a Facebook page too. Okay. We talked about equipment testing and product reviews. We talked about the email newsletters, weekly ARRL letter, the ARES letter. These are just samples of them. I talked a little bit about them, the DX Bulletin, provocation. Services, technical information service, so we just talked about that a little bit. FCC license modifications and renewals. You can do that through ARRL. Outgoing QSL service, if you're like me, and I'm sorry, but I still like paper QSL cards. Trust me, I still enjoy my paper QSL cards, okay? I send lots of them out. My wife will say, "What are you gonna do with all these? They're all in file cabinets." Yeah, but I know where they are, you know? Yes, sir?
You've got their free FCC license modifications.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little?
You've got the free FCC license modifications renewals. Aren't they charging $35 for those things?
Now the FCC has implemented the $35 charge when you renew. Yes, that's correct, but the ARRL doesn't charge you anything on top of that. That's
On top of it.
yes, right.
Okay.
You know, so if you go to W5YI, for example, or some other VE service, I believe they have a service charge in addition to that. So it's a benefit that you get through your membership. Yes, I'm sorry, we were not successful in defeating the $35 charge. ARRL did question it quite a bit.
The verbiage just makes it sound like.
Yes, I understand. Sure, I understand. That's a good point. Thank you. I appreciate pointing that out. So we do have the outgoing QSL service. If you are working stations in England, you know, you don't have to go to the post office and put a $2.50 stamp on it. you can send it to the ARRL along with a pound of other cards and get them handled for, pennies, basically. I mean, there is a small charge for it, but it's pennies, comparatively speaking. Your email forwarding service, we were just talking about that. There are ARRL-sponsored contests, events, and awards. And members-only pricing on certain things on the ARRL store online. And we're talking about community. We mentioned earlier 2,500 clubs in the United States that are affiliated with ARRL. Our outreach to youth, working with the Teachers Institute that I mentioned before. We're a partner on the amateur radio on the International Space Station program, the ARRS program. Has anybody participated in that here with the schools and brought ARRS into the schools? This is a program, where you can go into a school. You have to set this up a year in advance easily. But you know that the International Space Station has licensed amateurs on board and 2-meter 440 gear on board. And they've got pretty good line of sight from up there, It's like pretty darn good. So if you are working with ARRS and you demonstrate that you have the capability, to assure reliable contact, you go into a school and, this is a whole year-long project where you work with the school teachers and the classroom and you get X number of classes, maybe you get 100 kids in the auditorium and you actually make contact with the space station. And you allow the children to talk and ask questions of the astronauts. And if you've never seen this, I mean, you can find all sorts of videos on it on YouTube or the ARRL website. I mean, it is the most amazing thing to watch a 12-year-old realize that all of a sudden he's talking to somebody up there. It's really fabulous. Then we have, of course, the ARRL Foundation scholarship program, which awards 40, 50, 60 scholarships a year to not just high school students going to college, but adults that are going back to college. And if you look back at this year's award winners, there are some folks that are kind of look like us, They're not youngsters, but they're going back and getting other degrees, and they wrote an application for the scholarship, and they got it. And then there's a collegiate amateur radio initiative. So kind of like Mark Twain said, much about my death has been said, or something like that, right? Didn't Mark Twain say that? Collegiate amateur radio clubs are coming back in force through the initiative started by the ARRL. And if you had been able to get to Dayton or the Orlando Hamcation within the last couple of years, one of the booths you'll see there in the ARRL area is the collegiate amateur radio booth. And it's just great. And there are, like half a dozen different college kids there staffing the booth from the different schools. Purdue, for example, has got a club that's very active. Northwestern has a club that's very active. Okay, by the way, Rolla, University of Missouri, Science and Technology at Rolla, W0EEE. Anybody familiar with that station, that club? Yeah. They just celebrated their 100th anniversary. Art and I were both out there back in April. It was on tax day, April 15th. And that's when a big tornado roared through there too, and a big hailstorm. And we got to go out there and celebrate with the college kids the 100th anniversary of W0EEE from 1920, founded in 1923, and also award them a 65th year affiliation plaque affiliated with ARRL. But boy, that was funny. I mean, we were up on the roof. They've got a fabulous installation, like a 50-foot tower on top of the 7th-story engineering building with big beams on it. And they said, oh, come on, we'll go upstairs. We'll show you the antennas. And Ward Silver was there. Everybody knows Ward Silver, right? And Ward is one of their, I'll say, guiding lights. I mean, he's not a professor at Rolla. They have a faculty advisor, but he's a alumni guiding light, I'll say. And of course, all the grounding is in full accordance with everything that Ward, specifies. But we're up there on the roof, and all of a sudden the wind's blowing up, and we're looking, like a mile or two that way, and it's black as could be. And I'll tell you, we stayed up there for a few minutes, and then the next thing you know, you got 30 people running down the staircase from the 7th floor of roof line of the building, getting out of the way of that storm. Fortunately, they didn't do any damage. Okay, I'm sorry?
Sure it was grounded correctly, right?
Oh, it was. Oh, you should. Actually, on my phone, I've got pictures of it. The grounding system is beautiful. You know, big weatherproof box right at the base of the tower, and all the polyphasers are there, and the grounding wires. Really nice. ARRL also has an equipment insurance program, which is probably better than what you could get through your local insurer for your house. They have club liability insurance. Okay, and I don't know if the Maglite discounts are still there. I think that may have gone bye-bye. We talked about leadership. Okay, so we advocate for amateur radio with the U.S. government and the Federal Communications Commission, and also the international bodies that govern amateur radio, like the ITU. You have the Spectrum Defense Fund, you know, which is funding a lot of that work today. Legislative advocacy, you know, it's not just at the federal level, it's at the state and local level. I'll give you an example of state level. Over the last 10 years, you know, there's been a tremendous emphasis on hands-free driving, right? You go up to Massachusetts, go up to New York, or New York City certainly, and you'll find a variety of states that, you know, and they'll tell you when you rent your car, you know, hands-free driving. You can't be driving around with your phone stuck in your ear. So how did we separate that out and exclude amateur radio? Because the police officer, he doesn't know whether you're holding an HT up to your ear or a microphone or it's your cell phone. The flashing blue light goes on and you get pulled over. So the ARRL over the years has been very engaged at the state level or at the county level, if it's county law or city law, fighting these bills to make sure that amateur radio has been excluded. And I think we've been extremely successful in that area over the years. I don't know where we've lost, but that doesn't mean I've been tracking every single bill that went through. But anyway, very important. Antenna regulation and zoning. It's a pet peeve of mine because not everybody is as fortunate as some of us that live in an area where, you know, other than getting a permit from the town that says, okay, you can do this, and they come over and inspect the base of your tower and go away. It's pretty important, and it has limited amateur radio activity by lots of folks. And that's why I mentioned FT8 before, because I can think of some of my Boeing guys that live, you know, in deed-restricted areas over in St. Charles, and they get interested in amateur radio, and they want to get on the air. And what they find is, okay, I can run 100 watts, I can put a dipole up in the attic and not, you know, overly radiate the house, so to speak, not get into every telephone and TV and stereo that my kids have running, and actually have some fun, you know? It's a different way of doing it, but they can have some fun and they can make contacts. So what is ARRL doing? ARRL, as you know, has been putting through a bill in Congress for a number of years now to try to get the reasonable accommodation written in so that it overtakes the private contract of gated communities, I'll call it, CCRs, covenants and restrictive covenants. HOAs. Right, the HOAs, exactly. We are moving in that direction again. The bill didn't get through Congress last year. It was stuck in committee. It's now coming back, and I literally just saw an email from Director Stratton, who's down in Texas, who's been spearheading this. You know, we have a very interesting board of directors, just to digress for a second. The board of directors are made up of some really neat folks. Some of them are doctors, and some of them are lawyers. For example, Rick Roderick, your president. Rick is a lawyer. He's a labor law attorney. He's a highly recognized labor law attorney in Arkansas. Won an award for it, actually. So we have attorneys that can work in this area and work through Congress and lobby through Congress because they're familiar with the processes involved. We just got another congressman on board as a supporter of the bill, and that was just as of this morning I saw that email. So moving forward on that and trying to, again, open up the areas for amateur radio operators to have reasonable accommodation in HOA type environments where you can at least get a vertical or a dipole up or something. Maybe not the 100-foot tower with stacked beams, but then again, not many of us can afford that either. So, Volunteer Monitor Program. So everybody remembers the OO program, the Official Observer Program? Does that sound familiar? Okay, the OO program was replaced several years ago by the Volunteer Monitoring Program. It's made up of several hundred volunteer monitors that put in thousands and thousands of hours per month. It's just scanning the airwaves, listening for either out-of-band intruders, commercial broadcast, what have you, or amateur operation that is beneath the level of operation that you would like to hear on the bands. Let's just put it that way. And they are being led by former FCC chief engineer and head of the amateur division, Riley Hollingsworth, who retired from the FCC several years ago and volunteered to come back to, I'll say, work as a volunteer for ARRL to manage the volunteer monitoring program. And it has been very successful. And you can find if you're interested in learning more about it, you can find information about it on the ARRL website, and you can even find monthly statistics on how many hours have been put in and how many cases have been brought to bear. And the idea, is that we're self-governing. So the idea is not how many cases can we throw over to the FCC and say, go get these guys, have the cops pull up with, and arrest this person because he's doing bad things, or she, for that matter. The idea is to pick up the phone and let somebody like Riley have a conversation with this individual and see if we can help them see the error of their ways, and just handle it with peer pressure from the inside. I was talking earlier to you about volunteer opportunities. I can't overemphasize it enough. This organization runs on the backs of the volunteers. Doesn't run on the backs of those poor 90 people that are up in Newington trying to interface with 160,000 members. That's an inhuman task. So please, if you're at all interested in giving back to the hobby that I would guess has given you lots of pleasure over the years, otherwise you wouldn't be here, take a look at the volunteer opportunities or call me if you can't find it, or if you'd like to know more about it, please feel free to call me or call Cecil Higgins, and say, hey, Cecil, I'm up here in St. Louis. What can I do for you? How can I help you? There are lots of opportunities. And of course, we talked about ARES, which is an ARRL organization. So this is what headquarters looks like. If you've never been there, that building, that's the office building and the lab building. That's where all the work happens. I mean, they do now, to this day, have, I think, some outside warehouse spaces that they use. But that building was put up in the mid-1960s. I remember when the building fund was going on for that. As a kid, I was looking at the QSTs, and the cover of QST would show the thermometer as the amount of funding kept going up and up due to contributions. That's W1AW. That's the station building. That was the original ARRL building from 1930-something. In fact, there was another building before that in the early 30s, and it got flooded out or destroyed or something happened to it. I don't remember what the exact history was, but that's the current building. And that's where there are some museum pieces in there, like Hiram Percy's Old Betsy spark gap transmitter is in there, and his key is in there. But this is where all the bulletins come out of, all the transmitter racks and receivers that run code practice on the air and run the official bulletin stations from W1AW are all there. And then there's, of course, there's 4 or 5 guest operator positions. And so if you ever go up to Newington and you want to have some fun, if you want to know what it's like to be the hunted rather than the hunter, just get on the air and sign W1AW. You have an instant pileup almost anywhere on any band. And of course, the towers, you can only see one tower in the background there. But I mean, the antennas are phenomenal. They're 100-foot towers, 75-foot towers, 5 elements on 15 meters, 5 elements on 20 meters, 3 elements on, or 2 elements on 40 meters. It's top notch, of course. This is the W1AW operating position, and there's a picture of Art operating from up there. So out of the 6 board meetings that I've attended over my 3 years of tenure, we've gotten 1 opportunity to get on the air from there. We're busy. We're busy. Board meetings, just to give you an idea of what it's like, you go up to a board meeting and you get up there on a Wednesday because committee meetings take place on Thursdays, and you're in meetings all day. You start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you go after dinner, you've got another meeting. And it's just like corporations. We have to take harassment training. So we had to do a course in harassment training taught by a Connecticut attorney, in order to stay legal in the state of Connecticut. And then we had another meeting after that. And so I got a chance to operate also the same day. By the way, check out the pink headphones. Probably donated by Bob Heil, but oh my God, gotta be serious, come on. But anyway, we did have a little fun up there. Okay, this is the station of the future. It is what you like to imagine it to be. No, actually, there's a video that's supposed to play here, but it won't run on this computer. One of the things that ARRL is doing is you have W1HQ. W1HQ is the employees, I'll say, club station within the office building, not the W1AW building. And they've got a separate tower up on top of that building and separate antennas. And they are making it a state-of-the-art station. So unfortunately, you can't see it here, but just picture nothing but things like Flex 6500s for the radios and nothing but computer screens. And it's a test bed for new software and a developmental test bed basically for the labs and for ARRL. So what are new opportunities? Well, clearly a focus on the field organization and ARES. I told you about that committee, the what we call ECFSC, Emergency Communications and Field Services Committee, ECFSC, sorry, Emergency and Field Services Committee. I gotta remember that every time I say it. But David Minster is the major proponent behind this in recognizing that with all the fun things that we do in amateur radio, our raison d'etre, reason for being, is still that we are here to provide help when it's needed. So really focusing on that, improving and rebuilding the ARES system, better communications across the organization. We talked about better connection with and among section managers and division managers. I told you what division directors, and I explained to you what Art has been doing with me and with the 4 section managers here in the Midwest Division. And they're charged with redefining that relationship, as I mentioned. Focus on clubs, more opportunities and better communications, grants, money. I heard you guys talking about budget. $500,000 was given away last year to clubs. Are you aware of that? Right? Okay. Nothing stopping you from writing a grant application. The information's all out there on the ARRL website. I'll be glad to help you with it. I can't make it happen. Remember, I have nothing to do with that. That's dealt with by a separate board. But the bottom line is that there is money to be had to improve your club, whether it's for training or to go enhance the repeater systems. For example, okay, if one of your repeaters isn't on a backup battery system or has an emergency transfer switch that switches it over to a generator power and makes sure that the generator comes on, you could write a grant request for, let's say it costs $10,000 to do that, hypothetically. You could write a grant request and get that $10,000 possibly from ARRL. One of the benefits of being an affiliated club, okay? So don't forget about that. How do you get your money's worth? Remember, ARRL is here to help you, and as I said, I am here, and I'm local, so you guys can reach out and touch someone. Not everybody is in that same vicinity, but that's an opportunity for you. Technical questions, legal issues. You know that we have volunteer counsels, lawyers that are hams, that are in the local area that should you have a problem, we can connect you with someone. Now I know we didn't do too well, unfortunately.
I think half of them were silent keys.
I'm sorry?
Half the list I got was silent keys.
Well, they let's put it this way, they were not practicing law anymore, unfortunately. And again, these are volunteers. So it's our job to try to recruit. And now that you mention it, I got a thought on that? And you'll have to tell me how that ended out, how that worked out. Yeah. You got what?
We shut down the site.
Well, that was the 9/7 site. Yeah, yeah. Okay. But also, if you're traveling and you want to operate from a foreign country, we can tell you what's needed to do that and how you can get the right license. Something new, online elections. If you belong to any other organizations, and certainly in the world I came from, the engineering societies have been doing, online elections, IEEE, you can vote online. ARRL is still using paper ballots. That's somewhat expensive, especially with the cost of postage going up on a minute-by-minute basis, it seems like. B, it's old-fashioned. Why do we have to do that? So Art Ziegelbaum led the initiative to find a company that could manage online elections for us, and we began that last year, and you won't see it take place here in Missouri. So does everybody understand what happened in the Midwest Division with this upcoming election? So Art and I were standing for re-election. We were both nominated as director and vice director, respectively, to run for the next term of office. So my term of office, Art's term of office, would expire on December 31st, basically. And the new vice director and director would take office on January 1st of 2024. So we filed our petitions for election. The nomination petitions, by the way, have to be signed by a minimum of 10 ARRL members from your division in this case. We submitted them, and interestingly enough, nobody else submitted nomination petitions. There were no other candidates that wanted to stand for election. That's kind of good and it's kind of bad. It's a two-faced coin. You can look at it from one perspective and say, this is bad because nobody gives a darn. And it does take time. Like I said, for me, it's 20 hours a week minimum. So it takes time, and you have to be somewhat dedicated to do it. You can't just take the position and then, kind of walk away. You can't do that. There's too much going on. The other way of looking at it, you could say, well, maybe happy people are comfortable with what you're doing. It's not so bad. You take a few shots here and there, but not overwhelming. And thank you very much for not throwing any tomatoes. I appreciate it. I really do appreciate it, even though tomatoes are in season. I realize you could have grabbed some from your garden. My neighbor has some. I was going to grab some, throw them back at you. But seriously, it could be that. And if that's the case, that's fine. But, if somebody was to stand as a candidate against Art or, stand for election with Art or myself, it helps you think about the people that you're serving and what their needs are, and maybe fine-tunes your focus a little bit as well, especially if you want to win. If you want to win the election, you get really focused on what's going on. So what happened, nonetheless, is that no other candidates filed nomination petitions, and so on. The closure for nomination petitions was August 18th, and on Monday, August 21st, David Minster, who serves as, David Minster holds, not only is he CEO of ARRL, but he holds the position by charter, based on our bylaws, as secretary of the ARRL. So he determines, after the Ethics and Elections Committee certify the election results, so to speak, he's the one that releases the letter that says, okay, you're stuck with it again for another 3 years, and you're elected. So both Art and I are back in the saddle again for 24, 25, and 26. So I hope that you will support us in our endeavors, and we can use all the help we can get, really. There's another couple of videos, but I know we've gone over an hour, and I would like to take any questions that you might have or give you a chance to come up and just chat with me about pet peeves on the side if you don't want to ask a question in public. So I think I'll kind of wrap it up from that perspective and say thank you again for inviting me. I've enjoyed speaking to you, and I hope I've given you a little bit of additional insight as to what ARRL is all about and how you can help us. So thank you very much. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, sure.
Was that a Johnson, in the upper left-hand corner when you showed your stations, was that a Johnson Viking Transmat with a direct?
Oh yeah, that was the matchbox, a kilowatt matchbox. Yeah, yeah. I had to pull it offline. Come up and talk to me afterwards, and I'll explain to you what happened. But I haven't gotten into it yet. I haven't opened it back up. Yes, sir.
What's the total annual budget of ARRL?
Oh, you know, I'm sorry. I can answer that question for you if you allow me to open my book up, and I'll tell you. But I don't remember. But obviously, it exceeds our operating costs by about $1 million or $1.5 million. Excuse me. The budget operating costs exceed our revenue by about $1 million or $1.5 million per year right now.
Does the revenue include the return on the endowment?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah. The interest that we make, absolutely. So that's part of the problem. Now, if you think about it, the $10 increase in membership fees from $49 to $59 times 160,000 will give me $1.6 million. So now I'm coming close to breaking even. And some of you will elect to receive QST in the digital format, and others will choose to pay a surcharge beginning in January to get the print version. I got to tell you, just from my personal perspective, I'm an Apple guy. I got a MacBook, I got an iPad, and I read QST. I read all my magazines online, and I don't have room for them anymore. So I used to have like a 100-year-old house in U City up until 12 years ago. And in the basement shack, I don't think anybody, Harry, you were never over at the old house, were you? No, I don't think so. I had 2 7-foot-tall bookcases, 4 foot long each, next to each other, with 70 years of hard copy QSTs in them. And when we were getting ready to move, my wife Sue came down. And you got to understand, guys, my wife is very, very, very tolerant of this hobby, very tolerant. And she said, "You can't take those with you. We're not taking those to the new house." And all we did was move 6 blocks to another house that was only 70 years old at the time, you know, so get a new house, right? But it had more land, had room for a tower. I had a rooftop tower at the other house, you know, so I'm kind of giving up on paper. I mean, I keep a year's worth of QSTs and then I throw them out. You know, in December I clean everything out and I start again. But I'm, you know, kind of out of space for hard copy stuff, and everything is online. Now, I did cheat, and 12 years ago when we made this move, I said, okay, if I'm throwing all this stuff out, and I had to get extra garbage pails from U City, I mean, literally, I had to get an extra 3rd garbage pail for them to start picking up all the stuff that Sue said, it's not moving to the other house. And so I bought, at that time, ARRL was no longer making the total compendium of QSTs from, you know, from 1915 forward. Somebody else had picked up the CD and the license rights to put everything, all the QSTs from start to finish to that time on DVDs or CDs. And that was, you know, Windows 6, Windows 7 timeframe. I can get it to run on a Windows 10 machine right now, but everything's out there on ARRL's website. So if you want to look at a 1915 QST, you can dial into the website and you can pull it up and look at it. It might not be quite as easy to read through a full magazine, but you can certainly research articles or search on keywords and find articles on the topic you're interested in. I mean, for example, if you were interested in spark gap, you know, just key in spark gap and it'll bring up articles from the 1920s, obviously. So the combination of the savings that we'll see from perhaps not printing as many QSTs in hard copy as we did, and getting a surcharge for our members that still would desire the printed copy, will help balance the sheets out, balance the budget out as well. But as I say, we're at 90 people at headquarters, where we should be upwards of 100 or 110. So everybody up there is working doubly hard, extra hard. And of course, as I said, the organization rides basically on the backs of the volunteers, which is the way most volunteer organizations operate. So does that answer your question? I mean, I can pull up the budget for you and share it with you. I just don't remember the number, I'm sorry. Because I don't sit on Administration and Finance Committee. So I kind of look at the numbers from the top level, make sure it all balances, and then I let the rest of those guys do it while I'm off figuring out some of the other stuff. Other questions? Okay, oh, yes.
Has the upcharge for the QST been set yet?
Yeah, the upcharge will start on January 1st. You'll get emails and letters.
Saw the amount for it though.
Oh, $25.
25?
Now, if you're a life member, it's different. And if you're a life member, you know, if you want it sent first class mail, it's different. But, you know, I don't know that you need it sent first class mail. Right. First class mail is ridiculously expensive. Yes, sir.
Didn't W1A, W1, a good set of all those hard copies?
Oh, yeah. The AR, so headquarters has a library, and they have 3 or 4 or 5 sets of bound copies. So we don't worry, the masters are all there.
Oh,
In fact, I can tell you where the photographs for some of the pictures from the 1940s and 50s QSTs are even in a file cabinet, because they ended up as part of the historical collection's purview. So we know where they are, but you know, there's a lot of stuff up there. And I got just throwing a plug for the historical committee. We've got a great group of volunteers that live in the Newington, Hartford area that come in and help sort through this stuff. And right now, if you go into so we are doing what we call rotating displays. In the ARRL lobby, when you walk into the modern building, the red brick building, the modern building, there's a big lobby. And the lobby is kind of divided in half. Half of it is ARRL stuff that's up for sale. You know, you want to come in and buy a sweatshirt, they got one on the shelf, you can buy it, and boom. The other half is the display of the historical collection, but the area is way too small to show the entire collection. We'd never be able to do it. So we're doing rotating displays. So for the summer display, it's all Heathkit. And there's a great Heathkit display there. And I can send you some pictures if you'd like to see it. Or I've actually got them on my phone. Then we just have this Harvey Wells sub-display, I'll call, that was set up for this presentation yesterday. You know, fall comes and we'll switch to something else. It might be Hallicrafters, it might be Collins, I don't know. We got to decide on what it is. Thank you again very much. You've been a great audience, and I appreciate the questions. If you have any other questions, just come see me. I'll be glad to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Thank you so much.
All right, any other announcements? We can still sign up for Bike MS tickets.
We've got tickets, you know, both AmFests
Tickets,
coming
tickets,
up.
tickets.
We've got
Wait,
tickets.
I see 2 that are orange. That's confusing, Art.
Yeah, I know. We did it on purpose. You guys do it on purpose.
Hey everyone, I'm Jerica, KI5HTA. I'm the summer intern here at ARRL HQ, and this is just an update on a special project we've been working on over the past year. Behind me you can see some of the antennas that make up the antenna farm here at HQ. Recently, we replaced an old set of antennas with a brand new tower and a stack of antennas. So let's go up on the roof and take a closer look. This is a small antenna farm used by the ARRL Radio Laboratory. The Radio Lab is a new project here to innovate in the space of a typical amateur radio installation inside of your home. On this brand new tower here, we have a 10 to 20 meter beam, a 6 meter Yagi, and verticals for UHF and VHF. You can also see over here, we have a tower with some satellite antennas on it, and then over in the distance, you can see one of the main towers for W1AW. Welcome to ARRL's new radio laboratory. This is an exciting space because for decades we've thought of amateur radio as being a desktop with some shelves, our radios tucked under the shelving, and then all of our accessories stacked on top of those shelves. It's kind of incredible because we think of amateur radio as a wireless avocation, and yet everyone knows that with all of our radios and antennas, there's a lot of wires. So one of the first things you might notice about the Radio Lab is there's not a lot of wires. This is because we've built a wiring management system, and that's this black piece that sort of circumnavigates the room here. It's set off the wall by some metal pegs, and the wires just sort of drape through it, and it allows us to manage the station rather neatly. You can see each of the operating positions are on rolling wheels. They're just conventional desktop height, but how many times have you been working on your station and needed to get behind your radios? Well, our equipment is able to roll right out and you can get behind that very easily. The other thing you don't see is a lot of gear on the table, and that's because we've employed the use of 2 equipment racks where things such as our ham radio transceivers, amplifiers, and some of our other accessories reside. From the racks, we can manage the power, including both 110 and 220 volt power, but also 12 volt power that some of the equipment needs. Most of that gear is hidden away in these racks, and the interface that the amateur radio operator will use is the visual display of some of these radios, including a microphone, a Morse code key, a keyboard, and a mouse. This operating position includes an ICOM IC9100 and a satellite station. This operating position includes a Flex radio. Flex is well known for its highly computer-controlled interface. This operating position is our radio automation test bench. Many of you might be familiar with ARRL product review. An extension of product reviews in the future will be to take that piece of gear that we're testing, put it on this test bench, and see how it integrates with a station that's already under full automation and control. A lot of the amateur radio gear coming out these days has digital interfaces that you can connect to a computer so that you can control your devices. We're interested to see how a lot of the radios in this industry can play along with each other. So this is a test space where we can create a highly automated station, and a bonus of that is that the station can be operated remotely. So I could be located anywhere and I can remote into the station and be able to operate it. Thanks for visiting the new ARRL Radio Laboratory, and watch for much more coming out from the ARRL Radio Lab, both in QSC product review and even on the air.
Today is National STEM Day. If you're not aware, STEM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And one local student plans to use a recent project to get in touch with some astronauts 227 miles above the Earth. Stephen Redland has our story.
Command config sat rx, where to point the rotors.
Sounds like quite a piece of programming happening out in Southwest Portland.
Now I can do stat rx x modem, and now it will download the TLE file.
Programmer Zeke Wheeler is running his self-built satellite tracker.
It's the Lego antenna rotor. Everyone's built Legos, not everyone has made an antenna rotor that works out of Legos. The antenna is about on the exact other side of the Earth right now.
Zeke is 11 years old. He's been into science since he was 1.5.
We bought a switch, a little battery holder, and a light bulb. We screwed it into a small piece of 2x4 and connected the wires up, and he ran around the house and opening and closing, going switch, battery, light bulb, and he had a great time.
National Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Day. STEM Day started 8 years ago. It's a day to celebrate students like Zeke. Nearly 7% of all U.S. occupations involve STEM.
Back around to the root cellar.
Zeke is homeschooled. In his life, he's already designed and built circuit boards, a 23 cm helical antenna.
The hooks connect to the antenna so that we can easily carry it around without it flopping around. Yeah.
He's also designed and built a 10-foot-long giant helical antenna. Zeke and his dad are using all their STEM skills to reach some very distant new friends.
And you want a pretty directional antenna to contact space.
He's going to talk with the astronauts circling the planet high above the Earth.
The entire reason that we did it was so that we could contact the International Space Station.
So he studied, tested, and earned his ham radio operator's license when he was 8 years old.
Trying to contact the ISS on ham radio.
He's preparing for his first ham conversation with the astronauts.
Good for you. We're going to make a list of things like to ask them. Like, what do we look like from up there?
His plan is to be ready for an end-of-year call. Locked and loaded, Zeke is celebrating National STEM Day by continuing to tweak his self-made tools.
We'll support what he's interested in, and wherever we can take it, as far as he wants to go with it.
November Lima Lima, clear.
With scientist Zeke Wheeler, I'm Stephen Redland, KGW News.
By the way, Stephen tells us the father-son duo could have just bought the parts and equipment that they needed, but they chose to do it all themselves instead.
November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra Mike 0 Lima Mike Kilo.
Mike 0 Lima Mike. Call sign. Say again for NA1SS.
Mike 0 Lima Mike Kilo.
Mike 0 Lima Mike Kilo. This is NA1SS. Welcome to the International Space Station.
November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra Mike 0 Lima Mike Kilo. My name is Isabella. I'm 8 years old. You're 5 and 9. Thank you.
Mike 0 Lima Mike Kilo. This is November Alpha 1 Sierra Sierra. Isabella, it's so great to chat with you. Thank you for getting on the radio and saying hello.
Thank you. Fly safe.
Thank you, Isabella. 7-3s.